I was born in a quiet village, the kind that doesn't make it to maps, let alone history books. We had no monuments, no heroes, no calamities worth retelling. Just dust, fields, and seasons that repeated themselves like the ticking of an old clock. No one bothered to reset. I suppose that's where everything started, not in tragedy or glory, but in stillness. My father was a tailor. He stitched clothes for people who would never own more than 3 sets in their lives. My mother mended more than garments. She stitched wounds, physical, emotional, even the kind that no one dared admit they carried. She never raised her voice. Her silence was sharper than any rebuke. I learned early that restraint wasn't weakness. It was strength that chose not to roar. We didn't talk much in our house, not because we didn't care, but because everything worth saying had already been said through a look, a gesture, a habit. I became fluent in the language of silence. That would be useful later in ways I could not imagine. I wasn't particularly bright in school, not dull, either. I was the kind of student who sat in the back and learned by observing people more than equations. I noticed how some students fought to be heard, while others wielded silence like a sword. I chose the latter. When I turned 18, I had no grand vision, no ambitions that stretched beyond the nearby hills. But I had discipline, not the loud, dramatic kind. The quiet kind that wakes you at a.m. without needing an alarm. The kind that keeps you training in an empty room long after the applause has faded. I took a job at the train station, night shifts. I swept floors, guided confused travelers, and fixed ticket machines when they broke down. People passed through. I stayed. One night, there was a power outage across the valley. The backup system failed. Everyone panicked. I didn't. I lit the emergency lanterns manually, one by one, walking the length of the station like a monk tending to candles in a forgotten chapel. When the light returned, people clapped. The manager said, "I showed leadership." I disagreed. I had simply done what needed doing. That phrase became my compass. At 24, a friend offered me a job in the city. Better pay. A chance to climb, he said. I declined. Not because I feared change, but because I knew myself. I wasn't chasing titles. I was chasing mastery. And mastery, as I saw it, required solitude, time, and relentless repetition, none of which the city offered. So I stayed. I worked. I listened. And I learned. I became the one people called when things went wrong. Not because I knew more, but because I panicked less. When a child went missing during a village festival, I was the one who found her, not through heroics, but by walking calmly into the woods where no one else thought to look. She was asleep by a stream, unharmed. When her mother cried and hugged me, I felt no pride, only quiet relief. The job was done. That was enough. Years passed. The world changed. Our village got electricity, the internet, even a grocery app that delivered once a week. But I remained unchanged. I still rose early, trained daily, read nightly. I still asked for nothing and took only what I earned. One winter, fire broke out in the eastern quarter of our village. It was midnight. Most slept. I didn't. I had been meditating. When I saw the glow, I didn't scream or run. I dressed. I moved. I broke a window and carried out 2 elderly siblings who couldn't walk. Then I returned to help neighbors form a bucket line from the well. By dawn, the fire was out. A few homes lost. No lives. People said I was brave. I disagreed. I was prepared. That's all. Preparation is the armor of the quiet man. It was during this time I met her, Lynn. She was a teacher, just moved in from the city. She asked why I always walked alone. I said it was how I listened to the world. She smiled. I liked that she didn't try to fix my silence. She shared hers. For a time, I believed I might finally choose company over solitude. But life, as it does, demanded sacrifice. When the floods came 2 springs later, the village lost its roads, bridges, and its sense of safety. While others waited for help, I acted. I organized food distribution. I built makeshift rafts with the younger men. I led rescue missions for 3 days without sleep. On the 4th, I collapsed. When I woke, Lynn was gone. She had left without a note. People said she couldn't live in a world where danger was always around the corner. I understood. The choice was hers. My path, however, was not. I returned to my schedule, my training, my service. And so, years bled into one another like pages from a book no one reads aloud. The world began calling me the Watcher. Children whispered tales about how I never aged, how I could appear anywhere without a sound. I didn't correct them. A legend, even false, sometimes serves better than the truth. But here's the truth. I was not special. I simply acted while others debated. I remained calm while others broke. I persisted while others gave up. And above all, I waited. Most people spend their lives waiting for something to happen. I was the man who waited while things happened all around him, and I acted when the moment called. Not before, not after. After the floods, our village slowly stitched itself back together. The roads were repaired, the food returned, and with time, the silence came back, though not as serene as before. It was heavier now, thickened by memories, by absence. Lynn's absence. I didn't search for her. I didn't write or call. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew that love, like all things real, return of its own accord. And if it doesn't, then it was never truly yours to begin with. Instead, I poured myself deeper into the rhythm of my life. Each day became a ritual. My morning routine, a series of movements refined by habit, not emotion. I cleaned my tools, swept my porch, prepared my meals, trained in silence. Repetition was my meditation. Some called it loneliness. I called it alignment. But something had shifted inside me after the flood. I began to see things differently, not through drama or suspicion, but with clarity. I saw how quickly the strong fell when comfort was removed. I saw how easily the confident unraveled when structure collapsed. And I realized, the real crisis is never the flood, the fire, or the famine. It is the untrained mind in the face of the unexpected. That became my new mission, not to save people, but to prepare them. Quietly, patiently, I began waking the younger men before dawn. At first, only one or two showed up. We would run. We would lift stones. We would carry water uphill. They thought it was strength training. I let them believe that. But I wasn't building muscles. I was building resilience. One disciplined breath at a time. When one boy quit after a single morning, his father asked me why I didn't scold him. I said, "A tree that can't root in quiet won't survive the storm." Soon, others joined. A group of 10, then 20. We trained in silence. No music, no shouting, just breath, sweat, and earth. I taught them what my father had never spoken aloud, that true discipline is not doing what you love, it's doing what is necessary, even when it feels empty. One day, a stranger came to the village. He wore a city suit, spoke with hurried words, and looked constantly at his phone. He asked for me by name. I invited him to sit. He declined. "I've heard stories about you," he said. "You saved people. You stayed. You built something." I said nothing. He continued. "The city needs people like you. Advisors. Emergency planning experts. Men who stay calm when others fall apart." I still said nothing. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a contract, and slid it across the table. "6 figures," he said. "Just to teach what you already know." I looked at the paper, then at the man. And then, gently, I pushed the contract back. "I don't sell the silence," I said. "I live it." He left, confused, maybe even insulted. But I didn't blame him. In his world, everything had a price. But I wasn't a product. Later that week, a boy named Wee from our group came to me in tears. His brother had been arrested in the city for a crime he didn't commit. He asked if I knew anyone. I didn't. But I knew what needed doing. So I went. Not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I had always taught that action must follow principle. I boarded a bus at a.m. and reached the city by sunrise. It was loud. Everyone shouted and no one listened. I found the police station. I sat in the waiting room for 7 hours without complaint. Like a stone. No one could move. When they finally called me in, I listened before I spoke. I asked for records. I presented what we had gathered. I did not argue. I did not plead. I showed facts. I asked questions they had missed. I pointed out inconsistencies with patience, not judgment. In the end, they released the boy. No apology, just a quiet nod. When I returned, we hugged me. I didn't hug back. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Next time, I said, you go. Because that's the point of discipline. Not to become someone others lean on forever, but to become the person who teaches others to stand. Years passed. The group I trained began leading morning sessions without me. I would wake and watch them from my porch. I had become unnecessary, and that brought me peace. Then one morning, the mountain groaned. Not thunder, not trucks, but the kind of sound the earth makes when it shifts its skin. The old stone dam built before my birth had cracked. By noon, the valley was being evacuated. Chaos reigned. Radios screamed. Helicopters circled. People packed bags they didn't need and left behind what mattered. I stayed. Not because I didn't fear death, but because someone needed to stay. I walked to the dam. The road had split in places. I climbed over debris, crossed a stream on foot, reached the control chamber. It was rusted, leaking, abandoned. Inside, I found the manual controls. No one had used them in decades. But systems, like people, still respond when spoken to gently. I tightened what I could, redirected overflow, used sandbags and stones to buy time. Hours passed. Night fell. I worked by lantern light, my hands soaked. At dawn, the tremors stopped. The dam held. When the officials arrived, they found me asleep against the wall, my head resting on a wrench. You should have evacuated, one said. I was already where I needed to be, I replied. They asked for a statement. I gave none. There was no heroism, only necessity. The village returned. People hugged, cried, celebrated. I returned to my porch. From that day forward, children came to sit by me, not to be entertained, just to be near. They brought questions. I offered fewer answers than they hoped, but more than they expected. I told them the truth, that greatness is not loud, that most strength looks like stillness, that the world will tempt them to move fast, but true power lives in those who wait, watch, and act without hesitation when the time arrives. Because in a world chasing noise, the man who waits calm, focused, and ready is the one who shapes fate. The dam incident marked a turning point not in me, but in the village. Before, people tolerated my silence. After, they respected it. But with that respect came something I had never sought: responsibility. They started calling me elder, even though others were older than me. People brought their disputes to my doorstep: property lines, family feuds, broken promises. I never raised my voice. I never passed judgment. I listened. I waited. And in the waiting, people often solved their own problems. When they asked what to do, I answered with questions. What do you fear? What are you clinging to? What if you did nothing for 3 days? Silence makes people hear themselves more clearly than any advice. But that stillness I offered to others began to be disturbed within me. I started waking up with a weight in my chest. Not fear, not pain, just a pull. A sense that I had delayed something too long. I was 49, still strong, still disciplined. But time was no longer a distant fog. It had form now, a shadow that moved when I did. I began to think of Lynn again, not with longing, but with understanding. I had chosen a path that could not be shared, and yet I wondered, had she been the test I failed? Not because I lost her, but because I had never fought to keep her? The question echoed through my daily rituals. I didn't change anything on the outside, but inside, I began preparing not for death, but for closure. That, too, is part of the Stoic way. So I took a leave from the station. I left the training circle in the hands of the young. I packed a bag with only what was needed: 3 shirts, a journal, a water bottle, and a single photo of her, creased and faded, but still warm with memory. I left without announcement. No goodbyes. Just a note on my door: I'll return when the waiting is done. The city had changed. Faster, colder, yet underneath the concrete noise, people were the same: anxious, distracted, lost in 1,000 blinking screens. I found Lynn teaching at a private school. Her hair was streaked with silver, her eyes still calm. She didn't flinch when she saw me. She simply said, "You're late." I nodded. I know. We walked without talking, the way we used to. We sat on a bench and watched traffic pretend to go somewhere important. She asked, "Why now?" I said, "Because I had nothing left to prove to the silence." She looked at me, long and slow. "And do you expect something from me now?" "No," I said. "Only truth." She told me she had married once. Briefly. No children. She had taught in 4 cities, visited 3 countries, and returned each time more certain that the world wasn't outside, it was within. That sounded familiar. I told her I had never left the village except to solve a problem or save a life. And now, maybe, to apologize. "For what?" she asked. "For staying behind when I should have walked beside you." She smiled, not big, sweet, just complete. "We were never meant to walk the same road," she said. "But it doesn't mean I didn't love you. Only that love, sometimes, isn't the path. It's the reason we keep walking." I nodded. There was nothing more to ask. That night, I slept in a guest room, not hers. And in the morning, we had tea. No plans. No promises. Just presence. Then I left. I returned to the village lighter, not because I had changed anything, but because I had finally said what was true. And truth, once spoken, stops weighing you down. But the world does not reward inner peace with ease. 2 months after my return, the illness came. They called it a new strain. It moved fast, attacked the lungs. The young survived. The old struggled. The hospitals in the city were full. Our village clinic had 2 oxygen tanks and a single nurse. The fear returned, not of the disease, but of being forgotten. People waited for help. Again. I did not. I walked from home to home with herbal mixes, taught breathing techniques, sat with the sick, and told them what I had told myself in solitude. The body may tremble, but the spirit can remain still. Some nights I went without sleep. I made food for those too weak to cook. I buried those who had no family left. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I had trained for this, not the disease, but the discipline required to face it with courage. One morning, the nurse collapsed. I carried her to her own bed and sat with her until she could speak again. She looked at me and whispered, "You're going to break." I looked back, just as softly. Only what's not needed breaks. By month's end, the illness faded. We lost 13, saved 57. No one said thank you. They didn't need to. Survival is its own gratitude. But I was not the same. My joints ached more now. My breath shallowed in the mornings. I moved slower, but still, I moved. That's what no one tells you about service. The cost is cumulative. It builds quietly, like dust on a blade, until one day, even the sharpest steel falters. I stepped down from training the circle. I gave the key to the village hall to the youngest among them. He cried. I didn't. He understood what I had built, and what I had chosen not to keep for myself. I returned to my porch, not as a guardian, but as an old man who had waited, acted, and now was ready to disappear. But just as I began to feel my purpose fading, the letter came. An envelope, no return address, handwritten. Inside, a single sentence: "You were right to wait, but not just for others. For yourself." There was no name, no clue, but I recognized the handwriting. Lynn. That was her final gift. A reminder that even in a life of service, one must also serve their own soul. That evening, I sat and watched the sunset, not with urgency or reflection, but with fullness. No regrets. No unfinished chapters. Only quiet. Only peace. The years that followed were quieter than ever, but never empty. I had become something of a ghost in my own village. Children waved to me like I was part of the landscape. Travelers asked if the stories were true. "Is it really him?" they whispered, never daring to ask directly. The people who knew never answered, and I never offered correction. What they believed didn't matter. What mattered was that I had lived a life they could point to. Not glamorous, not loud, but firm, rooted like ancient trees at the edge of our rice fields. You don't notice them unless they're gone. Each morning, I still woke at the same hour, still swept my porch, still trained my body gently now. No longer with intensity, but with gratitude. The machine had served me long. It deserved care, not punishment. Sometimes I would walk to the river and sit for hours, just watching the water pass. It reminded me of time, how it moves whether we notice or not, how it carries everything, yet clings to nothing. People began bringing their children to me, not for advice, but for listening. They would sit on the floor while I sipped tea. They would ask, "What do I do if I'm afraid?" I'd answer, "Be still. Name it. Then act as if it cannot touch your core." They'd ask, "What if I fail?" Then you learn. And try again. Or wait. Or walk another road. Eventually, they asked fewer questions. They just came to sit. And I welcomed that. Silence needs witnesses too. Then came the earthquake. Not strong enough to level buildings, but enough to crack roads, frighten livestock, and shut down power. It lasted under a minute, but it left an entire region confused. When the shaking stopped, people rushed out of homes. Some panicked. Others waited. I stood at the edge of the village and simply watched. Not because I was waiting for instructions, but because I had already learned. The first thing that must settle after chaos is not the earth, it's the mind. I helped with cleanup where I could, but the younger ones did most of the work. I was slower. Now, my knees stiffened in the cold. My fingers took longer to grip. I didn't hide it. Nature is not embarrassed by the seasons. Why should I be? Soon after, the mayor called a village meeting. They wanted to name the training hall after me. A statue, perhaps. Maybe a plaque. I declined. Statues crumble. Names fade. Stories distort. But discipline, character, calm under pressure, those ripple outwards quietly, lastingly. Plant trees instead, I said. In the field behind the hall. One for each life saved. No nameplates. No speeches. Just trees. They agreed. And so the field grew. Each sapling planted by a child who had once trained under me, or the child of one. That was my legacy. Not being remembered, but being passed on. One autumn, I fell ill. Not dramatically. Just a persistent cough that deepened each week. The healer told me it was the lungs. Tired after years of smoke, dust, and cold dawns. There was no treatment. Only rest. So I rested. On my porch, wrapped in the blanket Lynn had knitted for me the year, we almost stayed together. People visited more now. They brought tea, stories, laughter. I listened more than I spoke. Even my voice had grown quieter, so much so that some had to lean in just to hear a few words. I didn't mind. Let them come closer. Let them slow down. One morning, woke before sunrise and couldn't move. Not from pain, but from stillness so deep it felt like the earth itself was holding me down. I knew the time had come. Not with fear, not with sadness. Just a deep, calm acceptance. Like the end of a breath held in stillness. I watched the first light enter the sky and felt no need to chase anything anymore. Every moment had been enough. Every action measured. Every silence chosen. The world had not needed me to be extraordinary. Only consistent. Only ready. And that, I had given. When they found me hours later, they said I looked like I was sleeping. Peaceful. I had passed sitting upright, eyes half open, hands resting on my lap. They buried me beside the field of trees. No statue. No speech. Just the wind through branches. Years later, people still came to that field. They didn't speak of me directly, but when they trained their breath, when they taught their children calmness, when they acted without hesitation in moments of crisis, they carried me. Not in memory, but in motion. And that is the only legacy I ever wanted. The end total, 20 words across 4 parts. Story designed for a 20-minute voiceover video in Stoic tone and pacing. Let me know if you want this repackaged as a single downloadable document or want a version formatted for subtitles or narration.